My name is Thomas. I'm 60 years old now, but there was a time when I believed my life had already given me its greatest gift. I was 42 the day my son was born. Even now, I can close my eyes and return to that hospital corridor, the smell of disinfectant, the pale blue walls, the sound of shoes squeaking against polished floors. I remember the clock above the nurse's station ticking louder than it should have, each second stretching into something unbearable. Sarah had been in labor for 16 hours of pacing. Of pretending to be calm. Of telling her everything would be fine when I wasn't sure of anything myself, when the doctor finally stepped out of the delivery room. His expression was serious. There have been complications, he said. That word, complications, hollowed me out instantly. I thought I might lose them both. I remember gripping the edge of a plastic chair so hard my knuckles went white. I had spent years building stability, a house, a career, savings, believing control could shield me from disaster. But standing in that hallway, I understood something brutal. You don't control the moments that matter most. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, a cry pierced through the double doors. High. Sharp. Alive. The nurse came out first, smiling. You have a son. A son. I don't remember walking into the room. I only remember the sight of him, small, red-faced, wrapped in a white hospital blanket, and Sarah, exhausted. Pale. Watching me instead of him, they placed the baby in my arms. He was lighter than I expected. Fragile. His tiny fingers curling instinctively around my thumb. Something inside me shifted permanently in that moment. I had never cried from happiness before, but I did then. I'm your dad, I whispered to him. The words felt enormous, permanent. A nurse chuckled softly beside me. He doesn't look much like you. It was said lightly. Harmless. The kind of thing people say without thinking. I smiled politely, but Sarah didn't. Her expression changed, not dramatically. Just subtly. A flicker. A tightening in her jaw. I thought it was exhaustion. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? That night, after everyone left and the room was quiet except for the steady hum of machines, I sat beside the hospital bassinet and just watched him breathe. I studied every detail. Dark hair. Slightly longer nose. A faint crease between his brows even in sleep. He's perfect, I told Sarah. She nodded, but she didn't look at me. She stared at the ceiling instead. You're happy, right? I asked gently. Of course, she said quickly. Too quickly. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. We did it. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt something I couldn't name, not distance, not fear, just something unfinished, but I pushed it aside, because I was a father now, and fatherhood, I quickly learned, is louder than doubt. The first year was chaos, sleepless nights. Bottles at 3 a.m. diapers stacked like sandbags against disaster. Sarah struggled with exhaustion. I took extra time off work to help. I carried him around the house at night when he wouldn't stop crying. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the exact way he liked to be held, the way his entire body relaxed when my voice lowered. Hey, buddy, I would murmur. I've got you. And I meant it, every promise, every whispered reassurance. I meant it. When he was 6 months old, my mother visited. She stood over the crib and smiled. He's beautiful, she said. Then, casually, strange, though. He doesn't have your eyes. I laughed. He's still growing. But later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at my own reflection. Blue eyes. My son's were brown. Sarah's were hazel. It happens, she said when I mentioned it. Genetics are complicated. She was right. Genetics are complicated, and I wanted nothing more than to believe that was the end of it. As the years passed, my love for him deepened into something immovable. First steps, toward me. First word, Dad. The way he refused to sleep unless I read him the same story 3 times in a row. When he was 4, he fell and scraped his knee badly on the driveway. He ran past Sarah, straight to me. Daddy, he cried, and I picked him up without hesitation. Every time, when he started school, I took the day off work to walk him to his classroom. I remember kneeling down, adjusting his backpack straps. You'll do great, I told him. He looked up at me with complete trust, and something inside me swore silently, "I will never fail you." At night, Sarah sometimes seemed distant, quieter than before. There were moments when I caught her watching us, me and him, with an expression I couldn't fully read: guilt, sadness, regret. I interpreted it as overwhelm. Motherhood is hard, I told myself. Marriage changes after children, everything shifts, and so I worked harder, longer hours, more savings, more security. I thought if I built enough stability, nothing could crack us. I was wrong, but not in the way you might think. On his 8th birthday, I remember lifting him up onto my shoulders during his party in the backyard. He laughed, gripping my hair. "Higher, Dad." I looked at Sarah across the yard. She forced a smile, and in that moment, just for a second, our eyes locked. There was something in her expression, something heavy, like a secret pressing against her ribs. If I had asked then, truly asked, maybe everything would have unraveled sooner. But I didn't, because love makes you blind in very specific ways, not to danger, but to possibility, the possibility that the child you would die for, might not share your blood. That thought never truly formed in my mind, not completely, not yet, but it was there, like a shadow at the edge of light, and I had no idea that one day, that shadow would swallow everything I believed about my life. If you had met us back then, you would have said we were lucky, a respectable house in a quiet neighborhood, a stable marriage, a healthy child, photographs on the mantle, birthdays, vacations, school plays. Smiles that looked effortless from the outside, from the inside. It was more complicated. Not broken, not unhappy, just uneven, the way a table feels steady until you put real weight on it. Sarah and I met in our late 20s. She was bright, quick-witted, the kind of woman who could make strangers feel like old friends. She had a way of listening that made you feel seen. I fell for that. Hard. I was the opposite. Practical, reserved. I showed love by building things, a future, a home, security. I wasn't the man who wrote poems or surprised her with spontaneous trips. I was the man who paid the mortgage early and fixed the broken hinge before it became a problem. For years, that balance worked. Then we had our son, and our world shrank to a constant cycle of needs: diapers, daycare, bills, exhaustion, schedules. I threw myself into work, not because I didn't want to be home, because I believed providing was love. I told myself the overtime hours were temporary. Just until we had more savings. Just until things were easier. Just until we were safe, but just until is a lie men tell themselves. It never ends on its own. Sarah didn't complain at first. If anything, she seemed grateful. She stayed home for a while, then returned to part-time work. She kept the house running. She managed playdates and school forms and doctor appointments, and I mistook her efficiency for contentment. Looking back now, I realize I missed the early warning signs because they were quiet. A pause before she answered me, a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way she would sometimes go still when I hugged her from behind, as if her body had forgotten my touch. I told myself it was normal. Parenthood changes romance. Everyone says that, so I adjusted. I took my son fishing on weekends. I built him a treehouse in the backyard. I attended every school event I could. I tried to be present in the ways that mattered, and I was. He adored me. It was Sarah I was losing, slowly, like sand slipping through fingers you don't realize are open. The first time Mark's name entered our life again was at a neighborhood barbecue. We were in our mid-40s then. Our son was 6. Sarah had been helping a neighbor with decorations when she suddenly went stiff. I followed her gaze. A man had just walked through the gate carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a grin like he belonged everywhere. "Sarah?" he said. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Mark," she whispered. I watched her face change in the span of a heartbeat: surprise, discomfort, something else I didn't understand, all quickly masked by politeness. Mark stepped closer and hugged her. Not a quick, friendly hug, a full embrace, a lingering one. My stomach tightened. He turned to me, hand extended. "You must be Thomas," he said warmly. "I've heard a lot about you." His handshake was firm. Confident. The kind of confidence that feels like ownership. "Mark is an old friend," Sarah said too quickly. "College." Mark added, smiling at her. Feels like another lifetime, doesn't it? She laughed, a small, strained sound. Yeah, she said. A lifetime. He stayed at that barbecue for hours, he spoke to everyone with effortless charm. Told stories. Made people laugh. He was the kind of man who filled space without apologizing for it, and I noticed something I didn't like. Whenever Sarah laughed, Mark watched her, not openly, not crudely, but with familiarity, like he remembered the sound. Our son ran around the yard with other children. At one point, he raced past Mark and bumped into his leg. Mark looked down and smiled. Hey there, he said, ruffling my son's hair casually, like it was natural. My son looked up, and something in Mark's expression flickered so fast I almost missed it. Recognition, a strange softness. Then it was gone. Cute kid, he said, glancing at Sarah. She didn't respond. She just busied herself with plates and napkins, suddenly too occupied to meet anyone's eyes. That night, after we put our son to bed, I asked Sarah about Mark. She shrugged as she washed dishes. Just someone from my past. You didn't mention him before. Because he didn't matter, she said quickly. I leaned against the counter. Watching her. How close were you? She paused, the sponge still in her hand, the water running. Then she laughed lightly. Thomas, why are you interrogating me? I'm not. I'm asking. It was years ago, she said, forcing a smile. We dated. Briefly. Dated, the word landed with a dull thud. How briefly? I asked. She turned the faucet off too hard. Water splashed. Does it matter? That was my first real moment of discomfort, not jealousy. Not insecurity, discomfort, because the way she said it wasn't casual. It was defensive. I'm your husband, I said quietly. Of course it matters. She exhaled slowly, then softened her tone. It was nothing serious. We were young. It ended. That's it. I nodded. I wanted to believe her, so I did. Mark started appearing more often after that. At first it seemed innocent. The neighborhood was small, and he had apparently moved into a nearby apartment after a divorce. A friend of a friend, Sarah said when I asked why he was suddenly around. Then he started calling her for favors. Mark wants advice on his resume, she said one evening. Mark needs help finding a good contractor, she said another time. Mark asked if I could recommend a therapist, she added, like it was nothing. And I told myself she was just being kind. Sarah had always been kind, but kindness has a boundary, and I began to notice Sarah's boundary around Mark was blurred. She would laugh more around him, stand closer, touch his arm lightly when she spoke, a gesture I hadn't felt directed at me in a long time. One afternoon I came home and found Mark in our kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, drinking coffee. Sarah was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. They both looked up when I entered, and the smile on her face shifted, not disappearing, just rearranging itself. Hey, Mark said easily. Hope you don't mind. Sarah invited me in. Sarah wiped her hands quickly on a towel. He just stopped by, she said, too casually. My eyes moved to the clock. 4:30. I wasn't supposed to be home until 6. Mark's gaze held mine for just a second longer than it needed to. Then he smiled again, friendly, charming, harmless, but something about that smile made me uneasy, not because he looked like a villain, because he didn't. Villains never do. That night, Sarah was unusually affectionate. She sat closer to me on the couch. Rested her head on my shoulder. Suggested we watch a movie together. It almost felt like old times, almost, but I'd lived long enough to know when affection was natural. And when it was applied like ointment. As we went to bed, I asked quietly, are you happy, Sarah? She froze for a moment, then she turned toward me and smiled, soft, convincing. Of course I am. But she didn't say it like truth, she said it like a decision, and as I lay awake in the dark, I realized something that scared me more than Mark ever could. If my marriage was truly strong, why did one old friend from the past feel like a threat, and why did Sarah suddenly feel like someone I had to hold on to? Instead of someone I already had. That was the night I began paying closer attention, not because I wanted to, because my instincts, the same instincts that had carried me through 60 years, were starting to whisper a warning I wasn't ready to hear. There's a particular kind of fear that doesn't announce itself, it doesn't shout, it doesn't accuse. It simply waits. Mark didn't become a daily presence in our lives overnight. It happened gradually, which, in hindsight, was far more dangerous. He would text Sarah occasionally. Then more often. Then casually enough that it no longer seemed strange. At dinner one evening, her phone buzzed 3 times in a row. She glanced at the screen and flipped it face down. Work? I asked. Yeah, she replied too quickly, but she wasn't working that night. I didn't press. That became my pattern, not pressing. A few weeks later, I was looking for an old insurance document in the filing cabinet in our office. Sarah kept most of the paperwork organized. I rarely went through her desk drawers. But that afternoon, I opened one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an old envelope, no label, no stamp, just folded papers. Curiosity isn't always suspicion. Sometimes it's just proximity. I opened it, printed email exchanges, old ones. The date stopped my breath. They were from 19 years ago, 2 months before our son was born. The sender, Mark. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. I scanned the messages quickly. They weren't casual, they weren't friendly, they were intimate, emotionally raw. I miss you. I don't know if we made a mistake. I can't stop thinking about that night. That night, I sat down slowly in the desk chair. The date at the top of one message was etched into my mind immediately. It was within the window, the one every father subconsciously knows, the time when a child begins to exist. My hands began shaking. I flipped through the pages faster, then I saw it. I know you're married, but what we have isn't over. Her reply, it has to be. Not it was nothing. Not it didn't happen. It has to be. The implication was clear, it had been something. I felt like the room had tilted slightly. For years, I had told myself Mark was a harmless reappearance from her past, but he wasn't a memory, he was unfinished, and unfinished things don't disappear, they wait. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back exactly where I found them. I didn't confront her immediately, not because I was afraid, because I needed to think. If I accused her without control, I would lose ground. If I stayed calm, I might get truth. That night, as we sat at the kitchen table after dinner, I spoke quietly. I found something today. Sarah froze mid-sip of her wine. What? Old emails. The color drained from her face. Where? In your desk. Silence, then she set the glass down carefully. You shouldn't have been going through my things. I was looking for insurance paperwork. And you read private emails from almost 20 years ago? Her tone shifted, defensive, controlled. Yes, I said calmly. Because they were from Mark. And they were dated 2 months before our son was born. The air between us thickened instantly. That was a long time ago, she said. Answer the question. What question? Were you still seeing him when you got pregnant? Her jaw tightened. No, too fast, think before you answer, I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking you for the truth. She stood abruptly. This is unbelievable. After everything we've built, you're digging up ancient history. I'm digging up timelines, I replied. Her breathing grew heavier. It was over before we conceived. She insisted. You're sure? Yes. The certainty in her voice was almost convincing, almost, but something in her eyes betrayed hesitation, a flicker, a calculation, and that flicker did more damage than any confession could have. I leaned back in my chair. If there's even a chance, there isn't, she snapped. You don't get to question our son's paternity because you found old emails. Our son's paternity, she said the words before I did. I stared at her. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Silence fell hard between us. After a moment, her tone softened, too strategically. You're tired, Thomas. You work too much. You're looking for cracks where there aren't any. That sentence stayed with me. Looking for cracks, was I? Or had I just finally noticed one? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, listening to her breathing. It sounded steady, peaceful, but mine wasn't. I stared at the ceiling and did math in my head, dates, trips, work schedules, moments I had been out of town for conferences. There had been 3 days, right in that window. I had returned home to flowers on the kitchen table, just because, she had said. At the time, I thought it was sweet, now it felt strategic. By morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not jealousy, not anger, uncertainty, and uncertainty is corrosive, because once it enters your mind, it reshapes every memory, every glance, every touch, every laugh. You start replaying your life like evidence in a trial, looking for inconsistencies, looking for proof that you weren't blind, or worse, proof that you were. When our son came down for breakfast the next morning, he smiled at me the way he always did. Morning, Dad. Dad, the word hit differently now, not weaker, heavier. I forced a smile. Morning, buddy. As he sat across from me, I studied him more closely than I ever had before. His nose, his jawline, his eyes. I had always seen myself in him, now I wasn't sure what I was seeing, and that uncertainty terrified me more than any betrayal ever could. Because if the doubt was real, then I wasn't just questioning my marriage, I was questioning 18 years of fatherhood, and once that question forms fully, it can never be unasked. If doubt is a crack, fear is the moment it widens. For months after finding those emails, I carried the question alone. I didn't bring it up again, I didn't accuse, I didn't investigate further, I watched, I listened, I waited. And I hated myself for it, because every time my son laughed, every time he called me Dad, there was a whisper in the back of my mind asking a question I couldn't silence, but I refused to act on it, not without something undeniable. I didn't want suspicion. I wanted certainty. Certainty arrived on a cold Tuesday afternoon when my son was 10. He had been riding his bike down the hill near our house, too fast, too fearless. When he lost control and hit the pavement hard, the call came from a neighbor. There's been an accident. By the time I reached him, he was sitting on the curb, pale but conscious, clutching his arm. It hurts, Dad, he whispered. I scooped him up without hesitation. At the hospital, they confirmed a fractured forearm. Nothing life-threatening. But surgery was required to set the bone properly. As we filled out paperwork, a nurse asked routine questions. Allergies? No. Blood type? I answered automatically. Oh, positive, I said. She looked at the chart. Your son's blood type is AB negative. I blinked. That's not possible, I said without thinking. She looked up, surprised. It's uncommon, but not impossible. What's Sarah's blood type? She asked. A negative, Sarah answered quickly from beside me. The nurse nodded. That combination can produce AB negative. Her tone was calm, reassuring, clinical, but something inside me was already unraveling, because I knew my own blood type, O positive, and I knew what that meant. I didn't say anything then, not in that room, not while my son was lying in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling, trying to be brave, but later. While Sarah was in the restroom and my son was asleep from medication, I stepped out into the hallway and pulled out my phone. I searched quickly, blood type inheritance charts, Punnett squares, medical explanations. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. 2 parents, O positive and a negative. The probabilities didn't align the way I wanted them to. Could it happen? Yes. Was it common? No. The word rare appeared more than once. Rare. I felt my throat tighten. When Sarah returned, she studied my face carefully. You look pale, she said. I'm fine. She sat beside me. You're overthinking, she added quietly. I haven't said anything. You don't have to. That sentence chilled me more than anything else. You don't have to. As if she knew exactly what I was thinking. As if the thought had lived between us long before I voiced it. The surgery went well. Our son recovered quickly. Within weeks, he was back to his reckless energy. But I wasn't. The hospital chart haunted me. The word rare echoed in my head at night. I began noticing things I had never examined before. His height, taller than mine at the same age. His athletic ability, far stronger than I ever was. Even his temperament, intense, impulsive, passionate. Mark had those traits. I remembered that clearly. I hated myself for comparing them, because comparison felt like betrayal. But the doubt wouldn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, until one evening, while cleaning out old photo albums in the attic, I found something that made my hands go cold, a photograph, Sarah and Mark, taken at a party. The timestamp on the back matched the same year, the same window. They weren't just standing side by side, they were pressed close, her hand on his chest, his mouth near her ear, and the look on her face. It wasn't casual, it wasn't friendly, it was intimate, alive. I stared at that photo for a long time, then I turned it over again to confirm the date, 2 months before she told me she was pregnant. My chest tightened so hard it felt difficult to breathe. I realized then that I wasn't searching for reassurance anymore, I was searching for courage, because the only way to silence doubt completely was to test it, and that meant risking everything. That night, I stood in the doorway of my son's bedroom while he slept, his cast still wrapped around his arm, his hair falling across his forehead. He looked peaceful, innocent, mine. I whispered something I hadn't said since he was a baby. "I've got you." But the words felt fragile now, because if the truth was what I feared, then I didn't know what mine meant anymore, and for the first time in 10 years of fatherhood, I was afraid, not of losing my marriage, not of confronting Sarah, but of discovering that the child I would die for might not carry a single piece of me, and once that possibility fully formed in my mind, there was no going back. I waited 3 months, 3 months of pretending nothing had changed, 3 months of smiling at dinner, helping with homework, arguing about screen time, fixing a broken sink, kissing Sarah goodnight like our life wasn't balanced on a fault line. 3 months of rehearsing a question I wasn't brave enough to ask out loud. Every time I looked at my son, the doubt flickered, not because he felt distant, but because he didn't. That was the cruelty of it. He still ran to me first when something scared him, he still called for me when he needed help with math. He still leaned against me on the couch when we watched movies. Nothing about him changed, only me. The decision came quietly, not in a moment of anger, not after an argument, just a Tuesday morning when I woke up and realized I could not live another year with a question mark where certainty should be. I took a day off work, I told Sarah I had meetings out of town, I drove 40 minutes to a private clinic in another city. The receptionist barely looked at me. Paternity test. She asked neutrally. The word sounded clinical, small, it didn't capture the weight of what it meant. "Yes," I said. "Is the child present?" "No," she slid paperwork across the counter. "Then we'll need a sample from both parties. Cheek swab is sufficient." Both parties. The language stripped away emotion, reduced fatherhood to data. I had already planned it. A week earlier, I had taken my son to the dentist. Afterward, I had kept the sealed cotton swab the hygienist discarded, unused, clean, sterile. I had told myself it was irrational, paranoid, but I kept it anyway. At the clinic, I handed it over. My hands were steady. That surprised me. "What's the turnaround time?" I asked. 7 to 10 business days. 10 days, 10 days of living between two realities. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't expected, guilt, not toward Sarah. Toward my son, because even if he never knew, I was questioning him, questioning us. The drive home felt longer than the one there. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a while, staring at the house, the same house where he learned to walk, the same house where I read bedtime stories. The same house where I once believed everything was certain. I had just placed all of it under a microscope, and there was no undoing that. The waiting was worse than I imagined. Every ordinary moment felt loaded. At dinner, Sarah asked about my meetings. "Fine," I said. She watched me carefully, too carefully. There were times I wondered if she sensed something, if she felt the shift in me. But if she did, she didn't say anything. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I replayed every memory from the year before my son was born, work trips, late nights, conversations. I remembered a weekend when Sarah had said she was staying at her sister's house. I had believed her without question. Now I questioned everything, not loudly, just internally, quietly, relentlessly. On the 6th day, I almost called the clinic to cancel, not because I thought the result would change, but because once I knew, I would lose something permanently, hope. On the 9th day, an email arrived. "Your results are ready." I stared at the notification for a full minute before opening it. There was an attached PDF. My heart began pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I closed my office door, sat down, placed both hands flat on the desk. I tried to steady my breathing. If he's mine, I whispered to myself, nothing changes. But that wasn't true. If he was mine, something would change, the doubt would die, and I would finally sleep again. And if he wasn't, I didn't finish that sentence. I opened the file. The words were clinical, detached, probability of paternity, 0%. I read it again, 0%. There was no margin, no ambiguity, no rare. No unlikely. 0. For a moment, I thought there had been a mistake. I scrolled down, checked the sample IDs, confirmed the names, mine, his, match probability, 0%. The room went completely silent, not literally, but inside me, everything that had been loud, doubt, fear, anxiety, stopped, replaced by something far heavier, finality. I leaned back in the chair slowly. 18 years, every scraped knee, every birthday cake, every I love you, Dad. All of it still real, but biologically, nothing. My hands began shaking then, not violently, just enough to remind me I was human. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just sat there, staring at the number that erased my blood from his veins. And the worst part wasn't anger, it wasn't betrayal. It was the question that followed: if he isn't mine, then what am I? Because I had built my identity around fatherhood, around being his father, and now science had removed that title in a single digit, 0%. I closed the file, folded my hands, and realized something that terrified me more than the result itself. I didn't feel any less like his dad, not even for a second. Which meant the real storm hadn't started yet, because next, I would have to confront Sarah, and this time, I wouldn't be asking questions, I would be holding proof. I didn't confront her that night, or the next. For 3 days, I carried the result in my pocket, printed, folded, creased at the edges from how many times I had taken it out and stared at it. 0%, the number had stopped shocking me, now it just existed, like gravity, unavoidable. Sarah sensed something. On the second evening, she touched my arm while we were cleaning up after dinner. "You're distant," she said softly. I looked at her. I tried to see the woman I married, the woman who held my hand during ultrasounds, the woman who cried when our son said his first word. But all I saw was someone who had made a choice and lived comfortably inside it for 18 years. "I need to talk to you," I said. Her shoulders stiffened. "About what?" "Upstairs." Our son was in his room studying. The house was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher, when we entered our bedroom. She closed the door slowly. "You're scaring me," she said. I reached into my pocket and placed the folded paper on the dresser between us. "What is that?" "Open it." She didn't move. "Thomas, open it." My voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. She picked it up with trembling fingers and unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the page, once, then again, then they stopped at the number, 0%. The air left her lungs in a shaky exhale. For a moment, she didn't speak, she didn't deny it, she didn't accuse me of paranoia, she didn't ask where I got it, she just closed her eyes, and that silence told me everything. "How long did you know?" I asked quietly. Her lips parted. But no sound came out. "How long?" I repeated. "I didn't know for sure," she whispered finally. The phrasing hit like a blade. "For sure." I said. She sank onto the edge of the bed. "I hoped," she said. I prayed. "That he was mine." "Yes." "You weren't sure." Her hands gripped the paper tightly. "It was a mistake," she said. "A mistake," I repeated. "Mark and I, it was one night. Maybe two. It was confusing. We were stupid. 2 months before you told me you were pregnant." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "I thought the timing still worked," she whispered. "I convinced myself it did." "You convinced yourself," I said slowly. "Or you convinced me." She didn't answer. I felt something break inside me then, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture. "You let me believe he was mine," I said. Her voice cracked. "You were happy." The simplicity of that sentence stunned me. "You were happy." As if my happiness justified the lie. "As long as I didn't know," I said quietly. "I thought it didn't matter," she cried. "You loved him." You were such a good father. I didn't want to destroy that. You didn't want to destroy your life, I corrected. She looked up sharply. I was scared. Of what? Of losing you. Of losing stability. Of everything falling apart. I stared at her. So you built stability on a lie. I thought it would never come out. There it was, not I regret hurting you. I thought it would never come out. For 18 years, she had woken up every morning beside me knowing there was a possibility, however small, that the man sleeping next to her was not the biological father of the child he adored, and she chose silence. I asked you, I said quietly, when? When I found the emails. Years ago. Her face tightened. That was ancient history. It wasn't history, I said. It was a timeline. She covered her face with her hands. I told myself if he looked like you, if he acted like you, then it was fine. Fine, do you hear yourself? I asked. She looked up again, eyes red. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. The truth landed between us like a physical object. She stood abruptly. What are you going to do? The question hung there. I hadn't thought that far. I had been so focused on finding the truth that I hadn't prepared for living with it. Does he know? I asked. Her eyes widened. No, does Mark? She shook her head. I told him I was pregnant. He assumed it was yours. We stopped talking after that. You let him walk away. Yes. You let me step in. Yes. And you never once considered telling me. She hesitated. I was afraid you'd leave. I might have, I said, and that's exactly why I didn't. The logic was twisted, self-preserving, and brutally honest. I turned away from her then, because if I kept looking at her, the anger might finally surface, and I wasn't sure what I would do with it. Behind me, she whispered something that almost broke me. You're still his father. I closed my eyes. Biologically. I asked, no, then what am I? You're the man who raised him. I turned slowly. And what does that make you? She didn't answer, because there wasn't a word strong enough. I picked up the paper from the dresser and folded it again, carefully, deliberately. 18 years, reduced to a statistic, 0%, but as I stood there, one truth cut through everything else. Nothing about my love for him had changed, not one memory had faded, not one moment felt fake. The lie was hers, the fatherhood was mine, and now I had to decide something no test could answer. Do I tell him? Because once I do, there is no going back, not for him, not for me, not for any of us. For 3 days after the confrontation, Sarah and I barely spoke, not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. Our son moved through the house unaware, laughing on the phone with friends, asking what was for dinner, complaining about college applications, 18 years old, on the edge of adulthood, standing on a foundation that wasn't what he thought it was. Every time he called me dad, it hit differently now, not weaker. Stronger, because it was no longer automatic, it was chosen, by habit, by memory, by love, and that made it heavier. On the 4th evening, Sarah approached me in the kitchen. We can't keep pretending, she said quietly. I'm not pretending, I replied. You haven't said what you're going to do. I dried my hands slowly. What do you think I should do? Her face tightened. Don't tell him. The speed of her answer told me everything. Why? It would destroy him. It might, I admitted. He's about to start his life. College. New opportunities. Why ruin that? Because it's his life, I said. She shook her head desperately. It was a mistake that happened before he was even born. It doesn't change who raised him. It changes who he is. No, she insisted. It changes biology. Not identity. I stared at her. You don't get to decide that. Her eyes filled with tears. Please. She whispered. Let it die with us. Let it die, as if truth were something you could bury cleanly, but lies don't stay buried, they rot, and eventually, they surface. That night, I stood outside my son's bedroom door for nearly 5 minutes. My hand hovered over the handle. I could hear him inside, music playing softly, the rhythmic tapping of a keyboard. he was applying for scholarships, planning his future. I knocked gently. "Come in," he called. When I stepped inside, he looked up and smiled. "Hey, Dad." There it was again. "Dad." I sat down on the edge of his bed. "I need to talk to you about something important." His smile faded slightly. "Am I in trouble?" "No." He relaxed a little. "Then what?" I looked at him, really looked at him, the way his brow furrowed when he concentrated, the way he tilted his head slightly when he was confused. I had memorized these expressions over 18 years, and in that moment, biology felt irrelevant. But truth did not. "There's something you need to know about your birth," I began. He frowned. "Okay." I swallowed hard. "This isn't easy to say." His posture straightened. "You're scaring me." I did a DNA test. The words hung there. He blinked. "Why?" "Because I had doubts." "About what?" I held his gaze. "About whether I'm your biological father." Silence, complete. His face didn't change at first. Then confusion, then disbelief. "What?" I needed to be certain. "Certain of what?" he demanded. The test came back. My voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else, and I forced the words out. "I'm not your biological father." The room seemed to shrink. He stared at me like I had just spoken a foreign language. "That's not funny," he said. "I'm not joking." His breathing changed. "That's impossible." I thought so too. He stood abruptly, pacing. "So what, Mom cheated? Is that what you're saying?" "Yes." The bluntness of it shocked even me. He stopped pacing. "When?" "Before you were born." He ran a hand through his hair, anger rising fast. "Does she know?" "Yes." "And you just kept this from me?" "I found out recently." His eyes snapped to mine. "You did a test without telling me?" The accusation was sharp. "Yes." "Why didn't you talk to me first?" "Because I needed to know the truth before I destroyed your world." He laughed bitterly. "Too late." The words cut deep. I stood slowly. "Look at me." He didn't want to, but he did. "Nothing about how I raised you was a lie," I said firmly. "Every game. Every lesson. Every time I showed up, that was real." He swallowed hard. "Then why does it feel like everything just changed?" "Because it had, but not in the way he feared. Blood doesn't erase 18 years." I said quietly. He stared at me for a long moment, then he asked the question I had been dreading. "Are you still my dad?" The vulnerability in his voice shattered something inside me. "Yes," I said immediately, without hesitation. "I have always been your father." He looked down, blinking rapidly. "I don't care about blood," he muttered. I felt my chest tighten. "But you deserve the truth." He nodded slowly. "I need time," he said. "Take it." He sat back down on the bed, staring at the floor. "Who is he?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. "Mark." His head snapped up. "Mom's friend?" "Yes." He shook his head in disbelief. "That's messed up." "Yes," I agreed. We stood there in silence, two men, no longer child and father in the simple biological sense, but something else, something chosen. Before I left the room, he spoke again. "Don't go anywhere." The words were small, almost childlike. "I'm not," I said, and I meant it, because whatever this revelation changed, it didn't change my promise, but I knew the storm wasn't over, because next, he would want answers from her, and some truths don't just hurt, they divide. I didn't sleep that night, neither did he. Around 2 in the morning, I heard his door open. Slow footsteps down the hallway. Then the faint murmur of voices in the kitchen. His voice was sharp, hers was trembling. I didn't go down immediately. Some conversations don't need witnesses, but when I finally stepped into the kitchen, I saw something I will never forget. My son, 18 years old, tall, strong, nearly a man, standing there looking smaller than he ever had as a child. Sarah was crying. I was scared. She was saying, "You were selfish," he replied. The word hit harder than anything I had said. He turned to me when I entered. "Is it true?" he asked again, like maybe repetition would change the answer. "Yes." He looked back at his mother. Did you know the whole time? She hesitated. That hesitation destroyed her. I wasn't sure, she whispered. You weren't sure. He repeated slowly. So you just let him raise me anyway? Let him. The phrasing wasn't cruel, it was confused, and devastating. I loved you, she said desperately. That's not the question. He shot back. Silence fell heavy between them. I stepped forward. This isn't about choosing sides, I said carefully. It feels like it is, he replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me. You knew before tonight? Yes. How long? A week. His jaw tightened. So you both knew and didn't tell me? I needed to confirm it, I said. I didn't want to come to you with suspicion. He ran his hands through his hair again, the same gesture I'd done earlier that evening. It was strange watching your own habits in someone who doesn't share your DNA, or maybe it wasn't strange at all. Does he know? He asked suddenly. No, Sarah whispered. That surprised me. You never told him? I asked her. She shook her head. I cut him off when I found out I was pregnant. And he never questioned it? Our son asked. He assumed you were Thomas's, she said. The room went quiet again. Does he live nearby? He asked. Yes. Have I met him? Yes. The air thickened. Which one? He demanded. My chest tightened. Mark. His eyes widened. The barbecue guy. Yes. He laughed once, short and hollow. You've got to be kidding me. I wished I was. The next few days were tense but controlled. He didn't storm out, he didn't scream again, he retreated inward, which scared me more. He stopped calling me dad for 2 days, not intentionally, just unconsciously, and I felt the absence like a missing limb. On the third evening, he sat across from me at the dining table. Do you regret raising me? He asked quietly. The question hit like a punch to the ribs. Never, I said immediately, not a second of hesitation. He studied my face carefully, searching for cracks. For real? For real. He nodded once, then he asked something I hadn't prepared for. Do you want me to meet him? I hadn't expected that. I don't know. I admitted honestly. Why? Because I don't know what that does to you. He leaned back in his chair. I deserve to know who I am. The maturity in that sentence startled me. Yes, I said. You do. He exhaled slowly. Then I want to meet him. Sarah covered her face with her hands. This is my fault, she whispered. Yes, he said calmly, not cruelly, just factually, and somehow that hurt more. I called Mark the next morning. My voice was steady. We need to talk. He must have heard something in my tone because he didn't argue. We met at a quiet park. He looked older, more tired. I assume this isn't about small talk, he said carefully. No, I didn't ease into it. He's yours. The words landed between us like a bomb. What? I did a DNA test. His face drained of color. That's not possible. It is. He sank down onto the bench behind him. I never knew, he whispered. I believe you, I said, because I did. He looked up at me, shaken. How old is he? 18. His breath caught. 18 years. Yes. He stared at the ground. I would have. You don't get to finish that sentence, I interrupted calmly. He closed his mouth. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he asked the question that mattered most. Does he know? Yes. And? He wants to meet you. Mark looked stunned. He does. Yes. He swallowed hard. Does he hate me? I don't know yet. That was the truth. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday. Neutral location, coffee shop, public, controlled. That morning, I watched my son get ready. He stood in front of the mirror adjusting his collar. You okay? I asked. No, he admitted. Me neither. He looked at me. Are you coming? Yes. Good. That word, good, repaired something inside me. We arrived early. Mark was already there, standing, waiting. When he saw us walk in, his posture stiffened. My son stopped a few feet away from him. They looked at each other in silence, and in that moment, I saw it, the resemblance, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Same jawline, same posture when standing still, same intensity in the eyes. It hit me harder than the DNA result ever had, because now it wasn't numbers, it was visible, real. Mark stepped forward cautiously. "Hi," he said softly. My son didn't respond immediately. He studied him, evaluated him. "You knew my mom," he said finally. "Yes." "For how long?" "Years." "Did you know about me?" Mark's voice shook slightly. "No. I swear I didn't." My son nodded once. He didn't hug him, didn't shake his hand, just nodded, and then he said something that surprised all of us. "I already have a dad." The words hung in the air. Mark blinked. I felt my throat tighten. My son glanced at me briefly, then back at Mark. "But I still want to know you." It wasn't rejection, it wasn't acceptance, it was boundaries, and in that moment, I understood something powerful. Biology had introduced a new man into his life, but it hadn't erased me. Still, I knew the hardest part wasn't the meeting, it was what came after, because now he would have two men connected to him, and I had to trust that 18 years of love would outweigh 18 seconds of DNA. The weeks after that first meeting were the most fragile of my life, not explosive, not dramatic, just delicate, like walking across ice you aren't sure will hold. My son met Mark twice more. Short meetings, controlled, coffee. A walk in the park. A conversation about school. I didn't attend the second one, that was intentional. Some bridges have to be built without you standing in the middle of them, but I won't lie, that afternoon was torture. I sat in the living room staring at my phone, fighting the urge to text him every 10 minutes. "Are you okay? Do you need me? Are you coming home?" The word home suddenly felt like something that could be replaced. That terrified me. When he finally walked through the door, I stood up. Instinctively, "How was it?" I asked. He shrugged. "He's different than I expected." "How?" "He seems nervous around me." I nodded slowly. "He probably is." He looked at me carefully. "You're not jealous?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm human," I said honestly. "But no." "Why not?" "Because I'm not competing." He studied that answer, then he said something that hit deeper than anything else. "I don't feel different around him." I braced myself. "Different how?" "Like connected." I thought I would. "But I don't." I exhaled slowly. "That doesn't mean you won't." "I know," he replied. "But it also doesn't mean I have to." That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't about choosing a father, it was about defining himself, and he was doing that on his own terms. Sarah, on the other hand, was unraveling quietly. She watched every interaction like someone waiting for a verdict. "You're pushing him toward Mark," she accused me one evening. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm letting him choose." "You seem so calm about this." "I'm not calm," I said. "I'm controlled." She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't, because the man who had lived in doubt was gone. In his place was someone who understood exactly what could be lost, and what could not. "You're angry at me," she said softly. "Yes. Forever." I considered that. "No," I answered, "but forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing," and she knew that. A month later, something happened that settled everything. It was small, ordinary, but definitive. My son had his graduation ceremony. Caps, gowns, cameras flashing, families cheering from metal bleachers. Sarah sat 2 seats away from me, Mark sat further down the row. At my son's request, when they called his name, he walked across the stage confidently, strong, sure of himself. He accepted the diploma, then he scanned the crowd. For a moment, his eyes found Mark. They lingered, then they moved, and locked onto me. He raised his diploma slightly in my direction. Not dramatically, just enough, and he smiled. That smile wasn't genetic, it wasn't inherited, it was built. After the ceremony, he made his way through the crowd. Mark approached carefully. "Congratulations," Mark said sincerely. "Thanks," my son replied. Then he turned to me. "Hey, Dad," he said casually. "Dad," in front of everyone, in front of Mark. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just natural, and in that moment, something inside me finally settled. Mark extended his hand to me. I shook it, not as rivals, not as enemies, just as two men connected by the same young man. "I won't try to replace you," Mark said quietly. "You can't," I replied. There was no arrogance in it, just truth. That night, my son and I sat on the back porch, same place I had once lifted him onto my shoulders during birthday parties. "Are you okay?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said. "Really?" He looked at me thoughtfully. "I know who I am," he said. "I don't need blood to explain that." I swallowed. "And who are you?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Your son." There it was, simple, clear, chosen. The DNA test had stripped biology away, but it had revealed something stronger. Fatherhood isn't about who created a life, it's about who showed up for it. Every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every hard conversation, every promise kept, and I had kept every one. As the sun dipped below the trees, he nudged my shoulder lightly. "You're not getting rid of me that easy." I laughed quietly. "Good. Because the truth had shaken us. But it hadn't broken us, and I realized something I hadn't understood when I first saw that 0% on the screen. Biology answers one question, love answers the rest. Still, there was one final step left, letting go of the marriage that built this lie. Because fatherhood had survived, but the foundation it stood on had not. Fatherhood endured, marriage did not. Once the truth was spoken out loud, there was no way to return to what Sarah and I had been. We functioned, we were polite. We coordinated logistics, but the quiet trust that once held our home together was gone, and without trust, love becomes maintenance. One evening, after our son left for a weekend trip with friends, Sarah and I sat across from each other at the dining table, the same table where we once planned baby names, the same table where I told her about the DNA test. "We can't keep pretending this is fixable," I said calmly. She didn't argue, she just nodded. "I never wanted to lose you," she whispered. "You lost me 18 years ago," I replied quietly. "We just didn't know it yet." Tears slid down her face. "I thought I was protecting us." "You were protecting yourself." Silence, painful, but honest. "I loved you," she said. "I believe you," I answered. And I did. That was the complicated part. She had loved me, she had just loved stability more. We agreed to divorce without lawyers fighting over details. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no shouting matches over assets, just paperwork, signatures, a house split into memory and logistics. When she moved out, it didn't feel explosive like betrayal, it felt like something that had already ended long ago. My son handled it with a maturity that humbled me. "You're not divorcing because of me, right?" he asked. "No," I said firmly. "We're divorcing because of us." He nodded slowly. "I'm still coming home for holidays." "You better," I replied. He smiled, and that smile reassured me more than any legal document could. Months passed, the house felt quieter, but not empty, different, lighter. I repainted the kitchen, rearranged furniture, removed old photos, not out of anger, out of transition. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, I found the printed DNA test again. The paper was worn now, creased, faded at the edges. 0%. I stared at it one last time. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I tore it in half. Not because it wasn't true, but because it no longer defined anything. It answered a biological question, but it didn't define my role, or my worth, or my son, and I was done letting a number hold power over my life. 6 months later, my son called me from college. "Hey, Dad." "Still Dad, always Dad, how's campus?" I asked. "Good. Busy." Mark reached out. My chest tightened slightly. "And we're grabbing lunch next week. You okay with that?" I asked carefully. "Yeah." A pause. "He's not you." The words were simple, but they meant everything. "I don't want to replace you," he added. "You can't," I said gently. "I know." We talked for another 20 minutes about classes and roommates and a girl he liked, ordinary things, and that's when I realized something profound. The storm had passed, and what remained wasn't wreckage, it was clarity. One evening, months later, I was sitting on the porch when my phone buzzed, a message from Sarah. "I hope you're doing okay." I stared at it for a long time. I felt no rage. No bitterness, just distance. I replied simply, and I meant it, because losing a marriage is painful, but losing yourself is worse, and I hadn't lost myself. I had found out who I was under pressure. I was the man who showed up, the man who chose love over ego, the man who didn't walk away when blood said he could. At 60 years old, I thought betrayal would define the end of my life. Instead, it refined it. My son may not carry my DNA, but he carries my lessons, my values, my voice in the back of his mind when he faces hard choices, and that's fatherhood, not chromosomes, not percentages, not statistics, just presence, just commitment, just love that stays. If someone asks me today how many children I have, I don't hesitate. One, I say, because I didn't raise someone else's child, I raised my son, and that's something no test can take away. I thought the hardest conversations were behind us. I was wrong. It was nearly a year after everything came out when my son came home for winter break. He looked older somehow, not just physically, but emotionally. College does that. It stretches you. We were sitting in the living room one evening, watching an old game on television, when he muted the screen. "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Always." He took a breath. "Did you ever think about leaving?" The question was calm. Not accusing. Just curious. Leaving who? I asked carefully. Me. The word hung between us. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth deserved precision. "Yes," I said finally. He flinched slightly. "Not because I didn't love you," I added quickly. "Because I was scared." Scared of what? Of raising a reminder. His eyes searched my face. Of Mom's mistake. Yes. Silence. "I was afraid that every time I looked at you, I'd see him," I continued. "And that it would poison something inside me." Did it? He asked. "No, why not?" I leaned back in my chair and studied him, the way I had when he was a baby. "Because you were never a reminder," I said quietly. "You were a reality. And I chose that reality." He swallowed. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I." Another pause. "Mark told me something," he said, "that got my attention." "What?" "He said you're stronger than he is." I almost laughed. "Why?" "Because he doesn't think he could have done what you did." The irony wasn't lost on me. "I didn't do it for strength," I said. "I did it because walking away would have broken something in me I couldn't fix." He nodded slowly. "I don't want two dads," he said suddenly. I felt my chest tighten slightly. "You don't have to," I replied. "I want two men in my life," he clarified. "But only one dad." He didn't have to specify, but he did. "And that's you." The simplicity of it was overwhelming. No ceremony, no dramatic declaration, just clarity. I nodded once. "Okay." And that was that. A week later, Mark asked to meet me alone. We sat at a quiet cafe, the same one where he first met my son. He looked more at ease now, less shaken. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't owe me anything," I replied calmly. "I owe you acknowledgement." I waited. "I stepped into something that wasn't mine," he continued. "Even if I didn't know at first. And you stepped up when I didn't." I studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his tone, no defensiveness, just humility. "I'm not trying to take your place." He added, "I know." He hesitated. "Thank you." The words were awkward, but sincere. I nodded. "For what?" "For not turning him against me." I thought about that. "I didn't raise him to hate," I said simply. Mark leaned back slightly. "He looks at you differently." "How?" "With trust." That word mattered more than he realized. Trust isn't inherited, it's earned, and I had earned it. Later that night, I stood alone in the backyard, looking up at the winter sky. 18 years ago, I became a father, not by biology, but by choice, and choice, I realized, is heavier than blood. Blood is automatic, choice is deliberate. If I had walked away when I saw that 0%, I could have justified it. No court would have blamed me, no friend would have called me cruel, but I would have known I chose pride over presence, and that knowledge would have followed me for the rest of my life. Instead, I chose to stay, and staying transformed everything. One evening before he returned to campus, my son stood in the hallway holding his duffel bag. "Hey," he said. "Yeah. If I ever have kids someday." I waited. "I hope I'm like you." The words landed quietly, but they were heavier than any DNA report. "You'll be better," I said. He smiled. "Love you, Dad." There it was again, Dad, unshaken, uncomplicated, chosen, and in that moment, I understood something fully. I didn't raise a child that wasn't mine, I raised a child who chose me, and that makes all the difference. There was only one chapter left, letting go of resentment completely, because love had survived, truth had survived. Now it was time for peace. Peace doesn't arrive dramatically, it settles, slowly, almost quietly enough that you don't notice when it replaces the noise. 2 years have passed since the day I opened that file and saw 0%, 2 years. Since my marriage ended, 2 years since my son learned that the man who raised him did not share his blood, and today, when I look at my life, I don't see betrayal first, I see survival. Not the dramatic kind, the steady kind. My son comes home less now. That's what happens when life expands. Internships, friends, plans that don't include me at the center, and that's how it should be. One evening, he invited me to campus for a small ceremony, an academic award. I sat in the auditorium among strangers. When his name was called, he walked across the stage confidently, strong, grounded. Afterward, he introduced me to his friends. "This is my dad," he said naturally. No explanation, no hesitation, just fact. One of his classmates asked, "You two look different." He laughed. "Yeah," he said casually. "But he's the one who raised me." And that was enough. Sarah and I are civil now. Time softens sharp edges. We don't revisit the past. There's nothing productive there anymore. Once, during a quiet conversation about logistics, she said something that surprised me. "You didn't just stay for him," she said. "You stayed for yourself." I considered that. She was right. Walking away would have meant surrendering my identity to anger. Staying meant defining it myself. Mark remains in my son's life. They meet occasionally, talk about shared traits, medical history, stories from a past I wasn't part of, and that's okay, because fatherhood isn't threatened by information, it's threatened by absence, and I was never absent. A few months ago, I cleaned out the attic, old toys, school projects, drawings. I found a crayon picture from when he was 5, 3 stick figures, one small, 2 tall, above one tall figure, in uneven letters. He had written, "Dad." It wasn't science that put that label there, it wasn't genetics, it was experience, memory, presence. I sat on the attic floor holding that drawing for a long time, not because it proved anything, but because it reminded me of something simple. Fatherhood isn't about who starts a life, it's about who sustains it, last week, he called me late at night. "Can I run something by you?" He asked, always. He told me about a decision he was struggling with, a job offer in another state. Pros. Cons. Risk. I listened, then I gave him my honest advice, not as a biological authority, not as a man trying to prove anything, just as his father. When the conversation ended, he said something that closed this chapter completely. "Thanks, Dad. I trust you." Trust, the one thing that had been broken in my marriage, the one thing I had feared losing with him, and yet, it was intact, stronger than ever. If someone asks me now, "Didn't it hurt to find out he wasn't yours?" I tell them the truth. Yes, it hurt to know I had been deceived, it hurt to question 18 years of memory, it hurt to look at a number on a page that said 0%, but pain clarifies. And clarity taught me something powerful. Blood makes you related, choice makes you a parent. If I had walked away, I would have confirmed biology mattered more than love. By staying, I proved the opposite. My name is Thomas. I raised a child that wasn't mine by DNA, but he is mine by every other measure that counts. And when he calls me Dad, there isn't a single part of me that doubts it anymore. If this story touched you, if it made you think about what truly makes a father, or reminded you that love is stronger than blood, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these real, emotional stories reach more people who might need to hear them. And if you've ever faced a truth that changed your life, share your thoughts in the comments. you're not alone.